A man's glory. What is glory to a man? What was glory to God? Chris had wondered and studied but couldn't seem ever entirely to know. He rose at 5 a.m. every morning to put in a day's worth of work at the local foundry for $12 an hour before attending classes. Chris felt alone, buried in work and barely functioning. Most nights he smoked 2 blunts without a wink of sleep. The days began to blur together. Sleep was the cousin of death, so he couldn't let life pass him. Chris thought he needed the job to get money. Money got him what he needed. Handling his needs got him girls. Chasing girls brought him to college. He's in college to get a better job to repeat the cycle until he has more money than he could spend. His girl would find a way to spend all his life's earnings until one day he was wrinkled. Girls wouldn't bother loving him without green. Today was his payday, and his latest and longest lady wanted a night on the town. He felt conquered by exhaustion and emotional depletion. Toiling for love, working so hard to feel appreciated when his value felt so conditional. He had passed out on the 2-hour car ride home in the temp agency's van. Waking up at the transport depot to catch an hour-long bus ride back to campus for his evening classes. Every day he attempted this dance, enduring and pushed because this is all men did, right? He was raised off of late meals, lonely sporting events, and walking to school. Both parents worked with great degrees. He never knew a fundamental gender role but enjoyed being a man. Long in the tooth, stoic and self-soothing, he cared for others and protected those he loved fiercely. He craved discipline and sacrifice for his family. He refused to be controlled in his life or control others. He controlled only himself. He wished someone taught him to break stoic psychosis and know his emotions' depths. Along came Margot Hoskadalio, a beautiful young lady with fire in her heart and green in her brown eyes. They wanted each other the moment their eyes locked. Margot moved hell and earth to meet him, and heaven and hell burdened their judgment at the chance of love. Every day the routine felt the same as their eros desire bloomed into 2 years of bipolar love. He thought she was the only one who could understand, as if she either didn't see it or didn't mind. He needed rest, and she wanted to discuss her anger, sadness, and frustrations. He was either walking in the door or preparing to nap. Another day fading away, the line went dead after 30 minutes of arguing and explaining himself. Chris Torjun was dripping wet from the shower and fighting tears, combating this manic and emotional dysmorphia that he once thought was love. It was evident to anyone he and his girlfriend never saw things eye to eye. Fighting had become the only way for Margot to know he still cared. He was tired of fighting. Chris was in the middle of getting ready for a date they had planned a week before. He needed sleep, but she reserved things for him right after his shift so he wouldn't go off. She thought it was the perfect time to laundry list all the problems she had rediscovered an hour beforehand. It must have been perfect timing for her. Chris had grown tired of the pattern before they were supposed to do something meaningful. It's been a couple of years of the modern experiment of dating, the new age term for flirting, sex, arguing, and acting out every negative quality inherited from their parents before growing tired of the other. He managed to shrimp to look himself over in the mirror. He knew this was his last relationship. If it didn't work out, there was nothing left inside of him. He never wanted to try this again. Margot Dahlia was home, crossed between anger and worry, wondering why he hadn't called her back after hanging up. He used to be so noble. He had no issue fighting for her love before. She remembered the thrill of it all a year ago. He would go far away to remind her he loved her. They would go out on expensive dates, buy her outfits to show off, and the sex was mind-blowing. He always wanted to defend himself, explain, or need space because his feelings were hurt. The pit of Margot's stomach told her Chris must have been cheating on her so that she would fight harder. It's as if he completely withdrew to his world. She wasn't allowed. It felt like everyone and everything made him happy but her. She wanted the joy he used to feel with her, the life and energy that kept her stuck on him for days before she needed a reminder. Now it felt barren, and there was nothing to replace him. Why wouldn't he break up with her if he wanted to so badly? It's like all he wanted to do was change her, be her father, trying to teach her some life lesson. She barely listened to her father. All she wanted was someone to enjoy these few college years with and explore herself fully. Why did he make that so difficult? All she wanted was freedom and someone who could handle her attitude. She had no real idea what he wanted from her. The fighting no longer made her feel loved. Chris stared at himself in the mirror. He was known as a handsome guy, his mahogany skin deep earthy in chocolate color. A strong jaw with a dazzling smile quickly faded from his face. However, it no longer meant anything to him. The smile had lost its way back to his face a year ago, and his look always seemed burdened. He no longer recognized the exhausted, broken man staring back at him. His body shook and constricted as the phone rang, knowing it was a problem he couldn't fix, a fight he couldn't win. His view of himself had shattered, leaving him dreading love. Yet his phone rang regardless. Margot's number flashing on the bathroom sink. The phone stopped ringing only a few seconds before it picked back up. He sighed, knowing it wouldn't end. He reluctantly picked up after just being cursed out. Margot greeted. I'm sorry about that before, baby. Your girl is hangry. Do you still want to go out? Chris was perturbed. He hadn't wanted to go out when the plans were formed. Chris didn't have money for Margot's every whim and desire, nor did he have the will or energy to keep working to satisfy them. His body demanded rest. His physiological needs were the only thing he seemed able to identify. How did you ignore everything you just said to me? He took his time sorting out his thoughts. Ugh, I just said sorry, didn't I? That wasn't easy to do. Can't you just get over it? It's not like you let me have my way anyway. So you can deal. I'm hungry, so if you want me in a good mood, you better take me out. Let's go, Margot continues. Chris felt sick to his stomach. How could she be so chronically self-censored and insensitive, then boldly accuse him of the same? It's like she saw no issue with her behavior. For so long, he blamed himself, usually too nonchalant or indifferent to register. His pain made it blatant that he had no idea how to respond. He didn't want to respond. He didn't want to speak to her at all. He wanted silence and a blunt. I don't feel well. He responds, distant. Man up, Chris. God, we had a little fight. Can't you go over it? Arguing used to turn you on. What about all this now? Margot sucked her teeth. Can I have some time to myself? Chris rubbed his temples. You always want some time to yourself. Be a man. Can't you handle me? Be honest. Margot snickered on the other end of the phone. I am a man. Chris gritted his teeth. Act like it then. Man up and take me out to eat. Suppose you can't deal with my attitude. That's on you, not me. I always get what I want. So hurry up, cry, and let's go. Margot hung up again. Chris stared at his phone with murderous intent. He snatched it up and smacked it down on the windowsill. Chris opened the wooden and vinyl blended window pane, slamming it on his phone repeatedly until the battery fell out the back. He considered tossing the pieces out the window, glad he wouldn't have to hear from anyone again until he decided to cash in on his warranty. He loathed his love life and the pain and hardship it brought. He'd tell someone to cry and give them what they want with a smile on their face. Chris sat on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands. He vowed never to speak to her again. Chris was hunched over naked in tears, ashamed and dripping wet with snot dripping from his nose. Chris sobbed out of his frenzy, wondering how he even allowed himself to be loved so poorly. As if this dance was Margot was love at all. Handsome used to mean something. Now it means nothing. Intelligence used to mean something, but knowledge unapplied was the enemy of mastery. Now it meant nothing. The charm used to mean something. Everything women seemed to love about him felt like lies out of desire and delusion. As if with Margot all these things disappeared, fight after fight, week after week. She saw him as nothing more than an arrogant know-it-all. Eventually in her mind, one of them would cheat or walk away. Eventually it was just a matter of who did it first. Nothing remained as in his life but anguish and misery, the dread of believing this would be the rest of his life. She wanted a subdued and weak man to fit her whims, yet asking her to be more friendly, reasonable, and cooperative was a human rights violation. She must combat, fight, argue, and scream whenever confronted with the reality of her shadow. He never felt the same need, reflecting and reviewing her complaints with the hopes of growing from them. Deep down, he began to believe he deserved it. Relationship after relationship, it became routine. He hated himself because his nature wouldn't let him hate Margot. Margot's personality was once attractive and new, but he brushed it off. But it was unceasing, without reason, and unstoppable. Chris felt it must have been mutual. He wanted to leave because he once thought they'll be inseparable. He couldn't take the endless fighting, anger, or frustration anymore. There was always something wrong she would never acknowledge or forget about fixing. It was killing him inside. He never saw his friends or family anymore. Being so far from home, this life killed and depleted him, leaving him nothing but a husk enslaved to the societal image. All he felt was aloneness, either by God's design or a mishap of the Dark One. He didn't know who else he had left but Margot, as she filled him with her image. There was a light knock and scratching outside the bathroom at the front door. It continued for a few minutes before Chris knew who it was on the other side. Does he forgive her so quickly and go to dinner another day, pretending it didn't happen, or choose his solitude and peace of mind? What was a man's true glory? The endurance of surviving war, or the joy of a life lived in the face of hardship? Though none of his efforts lasted, hours of talks, poetry, gifts, and dates had no real impact on her. It all came and went with the wind, wondering what was next all the time instead of savoring the experience of the week prior. Her needs were a bottomless pit, and her one sword. He was neglected and woefully depleted. He was fighting a losing battle. Only God could turn around or save him. He no longer knew what was desirable. His devotion told him to make things work and endure into marriage, but she didn't see things the same. Her desires seemed unquenchable. She worshipped materials and money. Chris couldn't risk losing his soul to sate a woman guided only by avarice and egoism. He sat quietly as the light knocks turned into banging. "Come on! I said I was hungry! I'm hungry!" Margot scratched, trying to coax him out. Chris felt like a prisoner of war in his room. He hung his head in shame as she banged and screamed on the other side of his door. "Open the door. Pick up your phone. I know you're in there. How dare you try to ignore me?" Margot banged even harder. He didn't see any way to make things work. He chooses his silence, solitude, sitting by his bed in a full lotus, continuing the meditation practice he had picked up months before. It helped to this extent, but made him realize you can calm the storm within, but there was nothing to stop it outside. He did not know what God's glory could show him, but he knew at the moment he had himself. His mantra was a tearful apology for ever entering the relationship, for losing himself within it.